Welcome to Who Runs This Park, Park Enthusiast segment, where we expand our universe and knowledge of experiences in the outdoors and at national parks through conversations with highly regarded and respected individuals in the outdoor world. As always, Who Runs This Park aims to be a catalyst for inspiration, exploration, and appreciation of our world's natural beauty. Today we get to hear the story of Erin Sprague, Protect Our Winters, also known as POW CEO. POW started in 2007 by pro snowboarder Jeremy Jones, turns passionate outdoor people into climate advocates working together to protect the places and experiences they love from climate change. Erin has been CEO of POW since the beginning of 2024 and is a passionate and exceptionally bright leader whose optimism that we have the opportunity to make a change is inspiring. I'm excited to dig into her heart for spurring climate action and how her impressive career leading up to becoming POW CEO has inspired her along this path. CMO of Mill, a climate tech startup, to the chief brand officer at Aspen Skiing Company, to leading the women's category at Specialized, we have so much to get into. Erin was previously also the youngest woman to complete marathons on all 7 continents and is on the pursuit to run a marathon in all 50 states. Erin, I'm excited to host you on Who Runs This Park. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Maddie. I love our parks, so let's jump right in.
Yeah, well, some way I actually wanted to start this conversation, as we were saying before we started recording, I just listened to your episode with Second Nature, which I learned about is a relatively new podcast I learned about. And so I very much so have climate policy and advocacy on the brain. Can you share a little bit before we get into some of the outdoor experiences and a bit of your background? Can you share with our listeners a little bit more about POW and POW's role in climate change?
Definitely. POW is the outdoor movement for climate action. So we unite inspirational athletes, brands, scientists, artists, basically anyone who loves the outdoors into a movement for climate. So we were started by Jeremy Jones, pro snowboarder, and he came to the realization in 2007 that the snow that he spends, most of his life on was changing. And he thought about, well, what can I, as someone who's super passionate about the outdoors, really do? And he realized that it's really about building a movement to drive systemic change. Like, think about the massive challenge that climate is. It's how we eat and travel and consume. And so, to solve it, we need big solutions. And big solutions require people coming together to help drive them. So that's what POW does. We advocate for renewable energy policy. We protect public lands. We stoke the vote as we're recording this right before a historic election. And basically, if you love the outdoors, you can do something for climate. That's the core of our message.
Yeah, I actually, in listening to the episode yesterday, or I was listening to it yesterday, signed up to join the POW team per the host. I know. So everyone go do that. Join the POW team. And yeah, it's a really inspirational and motivating thing to feel in the midst of it all feeling really overwhelming, to feel like you can make a difference and translate your love for the outdoors into action. So I love that. And I love that you said you guys care about public lands, because obviously getting into this podcast and interviewing national park superintendents, public lands have very much so become a center of probably like 90% of what I think about. So I'd love to hear your experience in public lands, specifically national parks, and if there's a memorable experience that comes to mind for you.
Yeah. So personally, I grew up in the Adirondacks, which I believe that's a state park, not a national park, but it is quite a large area of square footage, and it's just this beautiful part of upstate New York. It has a unique culture. It has 4 seasons. I grew up skiing, running, hiking. Like, the outdoors were just a big part of our family life, in part, from growing up there. And as I've grown up, I mean, who doesn't seek experiences in national parks? So I ended up living in California, and my favorite park, I mean, this is like picking a favorite child. So, I say this with caution and perhaps some reckless abandon. But my favorite park is Yosemite National Park. And when my now husband and I were dating and we were thinking of like, well, where do we want to get married? We really wanted to get married like on a remote mountaintop in Yosemite. And part of the challenge for wedding guests would be, well, who can get there?
Oh,
But
yeah.
my parents like quickly squashed that one and said like, okay, the like standard for your wedding is there need to be useful bathrooms. So that limited us. But we did end up getting married in Yosemite in
That's
the
awesome.
valley. And yeah, it's just this like we have this amazing connection there. We've brought our children there, we've hiked in the backcountry there, we've rock climbed there. So it's a pretty spectacular place.
Yeah, I'm actually excited, and this won't be true when I actually release the episode, but or it will have already happened, but I'm going to Yosemite in like 2 weeks for the National Park Friends Alliance conference, which is all the national park nonprofit partners meeting up, and I'm doing a I'm moderating one of the conversations, and I got a campsite super last minute in Yosemite Valley, and I'm going to do some camp or some hiking as well, so I'm really excited.
Well, one, getting a campsite last minute, like you have skills, girl. And second, I'm so thrilled that you're going to be leading that conversation. Like, what a wonderful gathering. And I mean, I can't imagine a world without our national parks and just the breadth and diversity of them. It is truly a magical part of our country.
I know, I agree. And I continue to feel that way more and more strongly as I spend more time in this world. I would love to hear it sounds like you have quite the exposure to the outdoors. And before we jump into your path and your career, kind of keeping on the trend of experiences in the outdoors, do you have a craziest experience in the outdoors?
Oh boy. Yeah, this is also a favorite child question. I really like multi-day experiences.
Yeah, so do I.
One, because they're awesome, but two, I think there's a Yvon Chouinard quote that the adventure starts when things start to go wrong.
Yeah.
And when you're out there multi-day, like things really start to go wrong. So, I've had a couple like really fun global multi-day experiences. I've done like an ultra marathon through Nepal, which was really amazing.
Wow.
I did a stage race through Africa cycling that was, then the longest stage race in the world. One of my favorite US experiences was also a multi-day cycling challenge. I used to work at Specialized, which is an awesome cycling company, super innovative, awesome bikes and cycling products. And I led the women's team. And they had this ride every year where they would ride from Salt Lake City, the like specialized warehouse, to at the time it was Interbike, which was like a gathering of the entire cycling community. And you like ride from the mountains of Utah to like the deserts of Las Vegas, and it was a
Wow.
supported ride. So it's not like, like there are harder rides when you're carrying your own stuff. But everyone on it, we brought all of our specialized bike dealers. And like these dealers were so fast and so strong. And my favorite part of the ride is how committed they were to like the group. So I, as like one of two women, the other two women were Rebecca Rush and Celine Yeager, who are these like world class cyclists. And me, like, I like worked the corporate life mostly. And they were like, okay, today's ride is going to be like 120 miles. If we go on dirt, it'll be a little longer. And I'm like, we're going on dirt? Like, what?
Yeah, you're
Um,
like, no one told me that.
I have a road bike, but yeah, it just ended up being this wonderful adventure. And my favorite part of it was the spirit. Like we were really committed to the group. Everyone was committed to like the group staying together. Cycling is a team sport. We would race up the hills for sure. And there were parts that, everyone was pushing. But at the end of the day, it was like, did everyone make it? Is everyone okay? And I just appreciated the camaraderie of that. And then also cycling from Salt Lake City to Las Vegas is a kind of weird and wonderful thing.
Yeah, were you cycling? Well, I have a couple questions. First, with regards to that race, I'm still learning the bike and cycling world and where people cycle. Like, were you on the side of interstates or were you like on back roads?
Yeah, so point to point can be a mix. I learned that in Africa, mostly the hard way. But in this case, we were mostly on roads, mostly climbing, actually, like going through the mountains of Utah.
Oh,
There were
wow.
a few, like maybe gravel sections, and then there is one interstate section because you have to get from point A to point B. So that was not a favorite, but
Yeah.
it's part of point to point. Like it's part of what makes it exciting is you're navigating whatever obstacle comes your way.
And then in Africa, you said a stage race. I'm actually not sure what that is.
Yeah, so a stage race is like, think of the Tour de France. There's a set
Uh-huh.
distance every day. So every day you ride from point A to point B. It's stops. If it wasn't a stage race, you'd probably keep going. Like 200-mile ultra marathons. Those aren't stage races. It's like you get from point A to point B and whoever's the fastest wins. This was, you really only do the set distance per day, but it was for 4 months. So you could have a daily winner and then you have, the winner of the whole thing. And those
Wow.
races often go, they often go to the person who's most consistent, who
Yeah.
manages to avoid injuries or exhaustion or mechanicals. So there's a whole different strategy that goes into it.
Yeah, how did you prepare for something that was 4 months long?
I would say you kind of prepare the first couple weeks when you're in the actual experience. It's totally impossible. I mean, I was living in New York City and I remember flying to Cairo and, they lost my bike and it was like
Oh
this
my
whole thing.
gosh.
I like barely made the start line. And then you have this 4-month race where you're racing 5 days a week and you're on gravel, road, dirt, like, and road has a lot of variations and like
Yeah.
how nice that road is, going through countries, communities, meeting people. Like, one of the things I love about cycling is it's a full sensory experience.
Mhm.
You're going at a speed where it's fast enough to cover some ground but short enough to really, or slow enough to really interact with the places that you encounter along the way. So we went through, like, I don't know, it was like 11 countries or something. It was
Wow.
8,000 miles. And this was like, I was like between stages of life. That was how I was able to do this. But it became this really interesting exercise in how little you actually need to live a
Mhm.
really fulfilling life. Like, every day, my goal was to wake up, put away my tent because we camped, and then we would cycle the distance. And that was my goal. Like, I would like have lunch because it would help me with my goal. I would like pay attention to navigation because it would help with my
Yeah.
goal. But I wasn't really worried about anything except that distance that I had to cycle, which some days was quite a formidable goal.
Yeah. Something I love about that, and I'm drawn to do the PCT one day, I think for similar reasons of I get all caught up in being productive every single day. And it's similarly why I like backpacking. And it's like, yeah, your goals are just so much more simple. And it's not like I'm sitting and feel like I can't be watching TV and should be reading instead, or like, like just the whirls my mind goes through. So I'm intrigued to do a longer term thing like that for sure.
Yeah, I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I have this wonderful group of women that I meet with every month. And they're all moms and these just like super impressive, like, they all have jobs that are improving the world in various ways and they crush at it. And we were talking about the importance of goals that aren't just rooted in productivity, but
Mm,
goals that are rooted in joy. And
mm,
I think that's something that our parks really tease out for us. You
yeah.
go to have an experience that's rooted in awe, whether that's in Yosemite or the Grand Canyon or Acadia, and you go and have this like amazing experience. And that's not about productivity. That's about really like having this sense of wonder.
Mhm.
And that's what I think our parks deliver so tangibly and so magically.
Yeah, something I think you'll appreciate, and I've said this before on the podcast, but similarly of like, I can't pick a favorite interview that I've done, but one
Till
that's
now.
until this moment, but one that
Right.
stuck out to me is when I interviewed the Grand Teton superintendent.
Oh,
And
the best.
I interviewed him. I asked him very accomplishment mindset of was like, tell me about some of the most impressive things people have done in the parks or in Grand Teton. And he immediately pivoted the question and was like, yeah, sure, there's like this ultra race and this like summiting all these mountains in the same day. But like what's actually more impressive is the families that are choosing to spend their time and resources to pass down the appreciation of the national parks to the next generation. And I was just like,
100%.
yeah, you, like, really outdid my question. It was so awesome, and it was such a good reminder, and he was also such a strong advocate of creating memories as an act of preservation. So by,
Mm,
like, becoming like, you will become an advocate for things that you care about, and that, to me, is, like sounds like a very undercurrent of POW of like you
Mhm.
are leveraging people's care for the outdoors to make them activists. And that was Chip, the Grand Teton superintendent's whole perspective was like, people will become advocates. Granted, they need the resources to know how to do that. And I think you guys at POW are doing a great job of that. But inherently, by creating memories in a place, they are preserving the place because they are most likely going to care about the place and want to preserve it and to protect it. So, just a
Mm.
fun tidbit from one of my favorite interviews.
Well, shout out to Chip. Like
I know.
that's
Tell me
that's
about
one
it.
of that's one of my favorite insights too. Yeah, like when I go to Yellowstone or the Grand Tetons are another great example. I actually often wonder how many people are visiting that type of setting for the first time.
Hmm.
And to me, there's something so special and so important in that. And we do think about it really similarly at POW. I prefer to have conversations with people about climate who know very little about it, who just have this like curiosity, or in some cases, even people who trend in the direction of not wanting to support it. Like that
Right.
is a more worthwhile conversation versus, having conversations with the initiated, which are also wonderful and feel good, but in the goal of doing something hard like climate action or sadly, like it's become this case, like getting outside and getting into
Hmm.
nature. I think the uninitiated and the expansion of the movement is definitely like a place that's really important to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. Something this is a little bit of a tangent, and then I'll get back to some of the questions I'm curious about asking you. But through this whole journey, I have realized my interest really lies in equipping people to get outside. And so I have some things in the works in tandem with the podcast of like creating resources for people to camp for the first time, to go in the backcountry for the first time.
Mm,
And I think so much of it is like it does honestly take a lot of planning, and it takes a lot of like somewhat a lot of like research before, and supplies aren't cheap, like all that stuff. And so yeah, I'm excited to embark on that little mini side journey. But yeah, it's cool that just I'm in awe of getting to talk to you because I've respected and been a fan of POW for a while. So it just makes this all the much sweeter to be having the conversation.
well, we are here for you. That is one of the most worthy goals I've heard, getting more people outside. And that helps us because once they're outside, we'll bring them into climate action.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly.
the
The
journey
f
never ends.
Yeah, it's like I kind of have joked of just did a little different stepping stones, and, like, one of the stepping stones can be joining POW. Like, it's like you get to the point where you're like, "Okay, now, if you're at this point, you probably like the outdoors. Now you need to become a part of Team POW. Next step."
Exactly. Exactly. You're a hype girl. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. I had mentioned in the intro, but and you've pointed to this in some of the adventures you've had, but regarding completing marathons on all 7 continents, first off, congrats. That's an amazing accomplishment. You're also in the pursuit of running a marathon in all 50 states, to my understanding. So I'd love to understand where your love for running started and then what's driven you to achieve these different milestones.
I love running so much. It is a source of, I mean, let's be honest, sometimes there's type 2 and type 1 fun. I don't know if you
Mhm.
know the difference, but
Yes, I do.
okay. Well, for your listeners, if they don't, type 1 is fun while you're doing it. Type 2 is fun only when you've like had a chance to have a bagel and like sit in a bath and recover and think, oh, yeah, that 100 miler was great. When's the next one?
Yeah.
But we talked about I grew up in the Adirondacks and my dad was a runner and I grew up playing like every sport. I think my parents' philosophy was like, let's put them in everything and see what sticks, which I think is good parenting because I'm doing that now too with my kids.
Yeah.
And I ended up joining my dad for a run one day and just really liking it and being on the trails. And it just felt like it had this beautiful simplicity to it. Didn't need a lot of equipment, could do it anywhere. And as I grew up, I competed. I was on my high school team, my college team, run marathons for a long time. And over time, my relationship with running is rooted primarily in discovery. So I love to travel and run. Like, how efficient?
Mm,
Like, get off a plane, you have your sneakers, and you can just totally experience a new place.
mhm.
And my goals in running have changed so much over time. There have been times when I've wanted to see my potential at a distance, but mostly it's kind of been about like really enjoying the process of it
Yeah.
and getting more fit, going up more hills, doing mountain races, doing road races, like every possible experience. And running the seven continents was rooted in all of that. So it was it was a goal. Like we were going for a world record. I had started a nonprofit to get people outside and
Mm,
active in
mm.
coordination with it. But the more important thing was like going to a place like Antarctica, going to like the foothills of Kilimanjaro and like running a
Yeah, that's
marathon,
amazing.
like total like and going with people. Like I would go with friends and my siblings joined me on a couple, and there are a lot more states than continents. The math is
Yeah,
very different in the new
it's very
goal.
different.
But same thing. Like I'm actually headed to Vermont this weekend to run a trail marathon, and my mom and sister and daughter are coming, and we're just going to
Oh,
have a
wow.
really wonderful weekend punctuated by this like 26.2 mile, trail experience. But I'm really excited
Just a
about it.
small little thing.
Yeah, at least it's not an ultra, but
Yeah.
it'll be really fun.
And are you usually running a race, or are you going somewhere and running just the distance?
It's a mix. So for the States, I'm doing 4 to 6 marathons a year, which is that's a healthy number.
Yeah.
And they're often stacked. So like I'll do 2 to 3 at once. And a lot of them are long runs. Like you can really only race 1 to 2 a year effectively.
Yeah.
So I'll go and like have them be a long run or just have it be kind of like a chill experience. And I often joke to my husband, like, this is a lot of effort for a long run, like getting,
Yeah.
traveling, getting a hotel, showing up to the race, but it's part of the goal.
Yeah, I ran the New York Marathon a couple years ago, and so
Congrats.
thank you. My sister's actually running it this year, which I'm really excited for her,
It's
but
such a good race.
it was amazing, and I also know how hard it is to run a marathon, so I'm impressed, and I also just know the time commitment it takes. So that's a really awesome pursuit, and I think it's cool that it sounds like it just brings you so much joy.
Yeah, a lot of joy and a lot of friendship.
Yeah.
I joke that like most of my good friends are runners and we hang out at 5 a.m. and it's like a beautiful shared friendship in the dark,
Yeah.
getting in a 10K.
Yeah. What has been your like, a marathon that has surprised you the most?
Well, I think when you're gonna run a marathon like Antarctica, like you're gonna be surprised. So that's
Yeah.
that's like not a good example. I think recently I actually feel like I'm surprised in every state I go to because you're
Mhm.
just experiencing a part of the culture. So a couple months ago, I went to Minnesota with a friend and we ran the Grandma's Marathon, which is this like
Uh-huh.
beautiful 10,000 person. And like, you don't really know what you're going to experience. And then like, maybe this should be surprising. Everyone was so nice, like
Mhm.
so supportive. It was so like Midwestern charm, like on full
Yeah.
display. And I totally fell in love with Duluth, Minnesota, where I had like never been before. It's this like beautiful city on the water. We were there in the height of summer, so that might have been a
Oh,
factor.
yeah.
But it just surprised you that I'm like, oh, I love Duluth, Minnesota. Like I
Yeah, you
never would have known that if I hadn't gone and run this race.
it's a good, for the 2 truths and a lie game of, like, one of the truths is, like, "I absolutely love Duluth, Minnesota." People would be like, "What? That's
What?
so
Yeah.
random." I can relate. I lived in Chicago for a summer in college for an internship, and I'm from Texas, and so the perfect weather of Chicago, I was like, "I need to move here right now." And everyone
Yeah.
was like, "Just make sure you think about, like, the rest of the year." And I was like, "I know, but the summer was, like, perfect."
Yeah.
Compared to the heat of Texas, so I would imagine Minnesota was quite dreamy in the summer.
Yes, it was. Lake culture.
Yes. Kinda transitioning into some more career-based questions. You've ended up you are now CEO of POW. How do you think did you envision yourself being such an advocate for, like, fighting climate change?
Not at all. I did not even know this was such a big issue 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So my trajectory, I started my career in finance,
Mhm.
which I think it's good to get background and fundamentals in some capacity. And for me, as a history major and someone who trends creative and artistic, like I actually loved finance. I was like, wow,
Mhm.
this is like hardcore and totally different. And it's like flexing a different side of my brain. As I was doing that job, I was running the marathons and my thought was like, I just love this. Like, I really feel like the outdoor industry is probably a better fit for my curiosity.
Yeah.
And I realized that the outdoor industry is $1 trillion industry.
Mhm.
It's so much bigger than I think people understand. And it has so many pockets. And I've worked in three of those pockets: cycling, skiing, and running. And
Mhm.
those have their own subcultures, their own types of businesses, consumers. And so they were all different but related because to the goal that you're seeking in the world, like we were getting people outside and we were building a business based on that. And it was when I was at Aspen that I started to really understand climate and sustainability. And
Mhm.
Aspen is this progressive, really thoughtful. I mean, for decades, they've been on the vanguard of sustainability work and really advocating for systemic level change. And
Mhm.
they supported this small organization. I thought at the time, POW. Turns out POW is a global brand with a really, really big influence. And I just ended up, when I was the CMO and I was watching like the impact on our business, like our team was tasked with like driving revenue.
Mhm.
And the ski industry in the past 40 years has lost almost a month of their season.
That's crazy.
And like, one, from a business perspective, that's not going to work. It's not going to
Yeah.
work first for low altitude resorts on the East Coast. And over time, it's going to really hurt a sport that I love, that I grew up having like some of the best experiences in my
Mhm.
life with my family doing.
Mhm.
And when we talk to people at PAL, that's what they often say. It's like the time on chairlifts with their kids and their, just people they love. And we need to have that moving forward. So I
Mhm.
started becoming really obsessed with climate. I would like read about it all the time and I would like go to every event. Aspen has like climate events every night. It's like this utopia of learning.
Yeah.
And I just woke up and it felt sudden, but it really wasn't. Like one day I was like, there are very few problems in the world that have the urgency that climate has. Like
Yeah.
we can really only truly solve this in the next couple of years. Otherwise,
Mhm.
it becomes about adaptation.
Yeah.
And we're actually already kind of there, but there's still a window to solve this. And I was like, that's different and important. And so I want to be in this quadrant of like important and urgent. And since then, it's just been this like amazing combination of all the outdoor love, but then also all the science and challenge and opportunity of this totally evolving space and climate.
Yeah. My understanding is after you were, and I want to go back to Aspen just because I love skiing. So I'm like, that's amazing that you got to work at Aspen Skiing Company. But following this trajectory a bit, my understanding is you went to Mill after your time at Aspen Skiing Company before working at Pat. Was that a stepping stone to be working in a more climate focused area?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like when you pivot in your career, and I've now pivoted twice from finance to outdoor and from outdoor to climate, your first pivot, you're just kind of like, I am going to like take the best thing I can and learn
Hmm.
as much as possible and start with a lot of hustle. And
Yeah.
so Mill is solving this really incredible challenge that a lot of people don't know about, which is food waste.
Hmm.
And it's like the dumbest problem in climate. That's what we always used to say at Mill because there's like it's just separation and keeping food out of landfills prevents a very, very harmful greenhouse gas. And it was just like, how do we change consumer behavior? And that is one of the crux moves of climate. The way that we behave now has to change. And it is. Like, if you look at renewable energy is absolutely going to be the way moving forward. The challenge is it has to happen faster. And
Hmm.
that's where you need these like public private partnerships to really drive the change that we need.
Yeah, absolutely. How did my understanding is you were on POW's board or you were POW's board chair before becoming CEO. So how did you be there's a few questions in this. One, I don't know how one becomes a board chair. Like, are you on the board and then you're directed or appointed that? And then how did that transition to you actually becoming CEO?
Yeah, so I started at POW actually as a volunteer. I would just go to their events. I used to live near Aspen, and they hosted a ton of events there. And I
Mhm.
had like a POW sticker, and I was like
Yeah,
a member of like the team. And then I worked at Aspen, which is a POW partner.
I
And
see.
Aspen had historically, as a big supporter, been on the board. So that was how I ended up
Mm,
transitioning into a board seat. And at the time, they needed the capabilities of a marketer. It was just a missing skill set. And my advice for people who want to be on boards is, but like, don't start out being on the board. Start out really learning the organization. Be
mhm,
a volunteer, be a donor, show up to events, meet the people. I went to like POW summits, and I really, really got to know the organization, in part because board work is really hard. It's unpaid. It's something that you do like extra to your job and
mhm,
family. And I think there are people who look at boards and think of it a little bit like, oh, like this is good for LinkedIn. And like that is actually really detrimental to nonprofits, especially.
mhm,
So our current board chair is like incredible. He gives so much time, so much of his network, his capabilities. That's what boards need. They need someone who's all in. So
mhm.
that's my advice. And so when I took it really seriously whether I was going to join the POW board or not. And I was like, all right, I'm going to be all in. So I looked at the board and I was like, oh, we haven't had a treasurer in like 4 years. So I called the CEO and was like, can I be treasurer? And he was like, great. Sounds
Yeah,
awesome. We need help.
yeah, they're
So
like, "Please."
yeah, so I learned the financials and kind of, just kept helping. A big part of a board is to fundraise. So I would be like,
Mm,
all right, what can I do for fundraising? Like I would write thank you notes and like call donors all the time. So taking those little steps. And then that was how I became board chair. And then when our previous CEO left, our founder a couple months later actually said, hey, would you ever consider doing this? And I was like, no, I'm working at startups. I'm like up to my eyeballs in like climate tech, like and trying to sell these things to consumers.
yeah,
And he was like, I think you should really think about it. There's a unique pathway here.
mhm,
And, it took a couple months, but finally I was like, yeah, let's take a look at it, see what we
yeah,
could build together. And I think founder CEO fit is really important, whether it's a startup, company, doesn't matter what the structure is. If you're part of an organization that has an active founder, you two need to be in lockstep. You need to have shared
mhm,
values, but different capabilities. And
mm,
that's how Jeremy and I are. He is this huge visionary. He sees things like way ahead of, when they're going to hit the market. He's built this amazing company at Jones Snowboards. And I'm an operator and I want to come in and I want to like build POW and I'm a
yeah.
scale person. So it just ended up being the right fit at the right time.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've had some friends who are recently out of business school, and then my dad was in that world a little bit and kind of seeing the challenges of when there is not that founder CEO connection. So I like
Yeah.
that you mentioned it because it hasn't been something I've personally experienced, but I've seen the challenges with like people really close to me. So that's really awesome that you guys have that and can,
Yeah.
move the needle.
And I think in any, like for your listeners, like with their manager or their boss, or as you become a leader, the CEO of your company, make sure those are values and ways of operating that feel like a fit.
Hmm.
And like where I always think like, is the whole greater than its parts? Like, are we rowing together to get somewhere faster? Or like, are we all the same, which is just boring and not as effective?
Yeah. Going back to Aspen Skiing Company again, more so because I'm just interested and love skiing. What did you get to, ski more often, or what was the culture like at Aspen Skiing Company?
Yeah, well, we used to have powder day rule where, the CEO would call an audible and say meetings are canceled this morning.
That's amazing.
So that was a good part. I think then we had a winter though where we had something, it was crazy. It was like 30 powder days or something. And he was like, actually, we have some meetings this morning. So there's a
Yeah.
point. But for the most part, yeah, everyone there loves to ski, ride, get outside. It's a very lifestyle driven place.
Hmm.
Aspen is a complicated place. There's a lot of wealth and change. And I feel like I read an article every year that's like, is Aspen losing its soul? And It's
Hmm.
not. Aspen has an amazing soul. I loved leading brand there because I felt like there was just so much material to work with and so much legacy and culture and tension in a good way.
Hmm.
So it's just a magical place. And I think it's always going to be like that.
Yeah, you made me think of New York because I was living in New York during COVID. And I mean,
Mm,
articles out the wazoo of like, is New York dead? And, it was rough for a while. It wasn't fun, but what a resilient city. I mean, think of all the things it's been through. And so it's fun to think about different communities in that aspect and knowing the Aspen soul is strong and well.
Yeah, if you have people who are committed to a place, it is never gonna be dead. I mean, I feel like San Francisco, where I've lived, has gone through the same challenges. And I don't know, I look at people who love that city more than ever.
Yeah.
So I've learned not to believe sensationalist
Yeah.
press headlines.
That's probably good advice just in general.
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
Just that helps that you have a little bit more balance. Jumping into POW a little bit more, what do you feel some of the challenges are with being CEO?
The biggest challenge for POW is that our enemy is the status quo. So
Mhm.
we are up against really big forces, namely the fossil fuel industry, that are some of the most profitable companies on earth,
Mhm.
who are not just going to be like, oh, POW, like, yes, you should drive change in this. Like, that's not how the world works. And we're changing the status quo in something that's fairly divisive. That's
Yeah.
another really hard piece. In my heart, I think all children grow up loving nature and loving animals and being connected to it. And I don't know how we lose our way
Mhm.
and miss that. And I think we have to go back to that.
Mhm.
And so the divisiveness of an issue that I think is inherent to our collective humanity is something that gets to me from time to time.
Yeah.
It's something we have to overcome.
Well, and that I mean, I'm glad you said that because that reclaiming that for people who maybe didn't get to experience it as a kid or just haven't been exposed is like the heart behind my, little side hustle that I'm working on to get people outside more. And it ties into I used to work at Google and I would teach technical courses and teach people how to code and all of that. And I was very passionate about equipping people and creating a safe space for people to try and fail and all of this stuff and build up that
Mm,
confidence. And I feel that same skill set channeling towards an area I'm like 700 times more passionate about of equipping people to be outdoors. And yeah, I believe so strongly like that the outdoors is so good for us. And it's like, how
mhm.
can we reclaim that? And it doesn't mean you had to grow up camping. You didn't miss the boat, like that's the message
Yeah.
I want to share. And yeah, I love that that is like something you feel in your heart as well. It makes me excited.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for this side hustle.
Yeah. I'm still it's like so I very much so like have ideas and then get really excited about them and then talk about them for a while before I actually make them happen because it takes time. So you're catching me in the like ideation phase.
Well,
But
good. That's when it's both special and fragile. So we'll protect your baby and keep it because we need to get people outside at any level. And another thing I hear a lot, and this is another big challenge in climate work, and just, you're talking about a little bit of consumer behavior change, like stepping
mhm,
outside of your comfort zone.
mhm,
And something that happens in climate, this happens to our athletes. Our athletes are public figures, they're Olympians, they're World Cup winners, they're record holders, fastest known time in, skiing, snowboarding, running, cycling, and climbing. And they get criticized for, how could you be a climate advocate? You take an airplane to your competitions.
mm,
And I really want to debunk this. This is not right. Basically, this criticism, it has roots in, again, like fossil fuel company marketing and a little bit of psychological manipulation.
mhm,
Climate advocacy is held to, for some reason, a way higher standard than other things. I think in part because people don't want this change to happen.
right.
Imperfect advocacy is the path to solving this. And we all exist in a system where we can't control everything. So, like, yes, you can take fewer flights, but you didn't control the fuel that went into the airplane.
Mhm.
You can change a light bulb, and you should, like, get an energy efficient light bulb, but you don't have the power as an individual to change your electricity grid. You
Yeah.
need policy and legislation to change that. And so we at POW talk a lot about imperfect advocacy. And we have a movie by one of our athletes named Amy Engerbretson. She's a professional skier based in Tahoe.
Mhm.
And she did a 24-minute film called The Hypocrite that talks about this,
Wow.
the criticism that she gets because she takes snowmobiles and helicopters, and that's a part of her profession. And yet she dedicates her platform to advocacy, and she talks about how, well, actually, her individual carbon footprint is so minuscule compared to the change that we would impact if we changed sources of fuel, if we
Mhm.
had legislation requiring renewable energy. And the scale of that change, it's hard for humans to understand exponential change. We understand what we see. And
Right.
that's why we focus on some of those individual actions more. But, I just get really worked up about this because it's like, if like I'm not a perfect parent and I'm always trying to get better and I'm always advocating for better parenting and reading the books and doing everything I
Mhm.
can, right? And so the parallel of that is like, should we not then try to be better in all of these categories? And climate is one that just gets so under people's skin. So we're
Mhm.
trying to like really debunk some of those myths.
Yeah, I love that. And it kind of highlights that for the needle to be moved, it has to be at the policy level. And so I personally, in listening to Second Nature, as I mentioned a few times, I loved kind of learning that and getting that perspective. And I'm excited to be hearing a little bit more about that in our conversation. Kind of looking towards the future. What I know we're in a really critical season and it's probably been like go, go, go because we are right before the election. But I guess what are you looking forward to for the future of POW? Are there any, partnerships you're excited about, stuff like that?
I'm excited about movement building. So the number of people who love the outdoors, this is good data for your side
Yeah,
hustle,
yeah, exactly.
is 175 million.
Wow.
That is like 57% of the US population. And if you go to like where I live, it's like 90%. Like they're insulted by anything less than 90% in
Yeah,
Colorado, right? And so, and in national parks, anyone who's going to a national park loves the outdoors, right? So
right.
that's probably close to 100%. So people love the outdoors. We can
Hmm.
translate that into things that are good. Climate is one category that we work on. So I'm excited to get more people involved. I think climate, for all the challenges I just outlined, the opportunity is there's record interest. We're not debating whether this thing exists anymore. When you see
Hmm.
hurricanes decimating
Hmm.
places like
Hmm.
Asheville, North Carolina, which was previously described as a climate haven, there are
Hmm.
no havens. Like our communities are now experiencing these impacts. So the irony of that is we can mobilize around that and we can drive action. So I'm excited for the policy change that we can enact, the
Hmm.
movement we can build. And then when we ask our Team POW members what they love most, this surprised me. I thought they would be like, "I love, learning about climate." They were like, "No, I love the community that I'm a part of in
Wow.
doing this work." And so we're going to deliver to that and we're going to make the community exciting and full of skiing and
Yeah.
just like a joyful part of people's lives.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you even saying kind of a while back you started volunteering with POW. I think it's cool of you to do these conversations also because your heart for it is very evident. And then I think it's making me want to get more involved. And I hope that listeners feel the same way. How can, and you've talked a little bit about it, but to really like clarify and solidify, how can everyday outdoor lovers, adventurers, our podcast listeners get more involved with POW?
First, join Team POW. So it's on the site. Just Google it and it's free for now. So sign up soon. And that's the starting point. And what that starts in our customer journey is the learning phase.
Yeah.
Follow us on social, follow our athletes on social, anyone from like Sasha DeJulian, who's a rock climber, to Chris Blevins, who's a cyclist. I mean, like we have so many cool athletes, and that's just fun. But they're posting; it's part of their role at POW and learn. So
Mhm.
there's climate involves a lot of learning, and this is another tactic. The other side of this fight tries to throw in a lot of like science and technical stuff, and decarbonization is technical. I'm not, saying it's not, but part of what we try to do is to distill some of the science, the engineering, the technical work that needs to happen to change energy systems, for example, and
Mhm.
make it more accessible. So knowledge is power, and that's part of what we're bringing. And then over time, we have events, we have film festivals. We were at the Leadville 100 mountain bike race this year, talking about our energy grid at the finish line. I'm
Yeah.
sure
That's what I
riders
want
were
after a run. That's what I or an event. That's what I wanna know about.
little bit of chocolate milk and grid transmission.
Yeah.
It was a great day. And
That's
so, come find us at those events, and we might even show up to one you're already doing.
Mhm.
And we really think about it as a customer journey. We have people who started like me as just like curious, not knowing a lot. And another example I like to bring up is Caroline Gleich, who's a professional ski mountaineer, a Patagonia athlete. She started just, hey, I just want to help, and today she's running for Senate in Utah. And
Oh,
she's
yeah.
she's been a part of POW for 15 years, and I'm so proud of her and inspired by her, and she's changing the conversation in a state that needs to have conversations around
Mhm.
environmental issues, reproductive rights. So if you live in Utah, check her out.
Yeah, that's awesome. My family has a house in Park City, so they spend a lot of time in Utah, and so my mom's seen she kinda shared her journey with me, so that's cool that she works with POW.
Yeah.
Uh, One thing I wanted to highlight is before we wrap up, you had mentioned the film festival. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I recently, in all these endeavors, did a documentary in the North Cascades. And it's in the process of being edited. Like we're in production, post production now. But the whole idea is telling the story of the park rangers through a
Cool.
backcountry trip. But it's really gotten me into the world of storytelling and the power of that. And I'd love to understand how POW is doing that with films. My understanding is Jeremy
Mm.
Jones just had a film come out, so I'd love to hear a little bit about that before we wrap up.
Yeah, we are all in on storytelling. I think it's wildly underestimated in climate more broadly. Climate communications are a key part of the solution.
Mhm,
And at POW, we have professional athletes and scientists and companies who are out there like doing cool things in the world that we can bring into this conversation. So we have a grant program where we actually give a grant and leverage the capabilities and talents of our network to help athletes create films. And
mhm,
so this is something that blows my mind. Like, not only today do you have to be like a professional athlete, the best the world has ever seen in your craft, you also have to be really good at social media and able to
mhm,
be a film producer on short notice.
mhm,
And especially athletes in the mountain community, which, don't have the contracts of like team sports, they're even better at it because they're building their own business and their own
mhm,
brand in their lives. And for many of them, that their impact includes climate. And that's where POW comes in. So Jeremy just did an awesome film called Purple Mountains. It's actually a sequel to his first Purple Mountains, which is all about like this topic of like bipartisanship in climate. And he goes to New Hampshire in this version and has conversations there with ski resorts that are trying to bring in new types of people, navigating changing snowpack. And, there are such intersectional issues in climate. It's disadvantaged communities that are going to feel more impacts more
mhm,
quickly. They already
mhm,
are. So we have a lot of films that explore all of the adjacencies of these topics, whether it's communities, water, fire, indigenous lands. There are
mhm,
so many topics in climate.
mhm, and so many as I've entered into this storytelling world, so many stories to be told, I'm realizing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
As our final question, just to kind of, circle back to the pulse of the national parks and public lands, you've touched on it, but just as a final note, Could you just share why you feel national parks and public lands are important to you?
I feel like they're a foundation of my love for the outdoors. I mean, my greatest memories, we talked about memory, are in Yosemite, Yellowstone, Bryce.
Hmm.
Oh my gosh, I can name like 20 more. Glacier. And it's like these memorable, emotional experiences with people I love, surrounded by natural beauty that creates this sense of awe and wonder.
Hmm.
And I just feel so appreciative of the work that generations before us and now have done to preserve these resources.
Yeah.
And in part, it's why I'm doing this work, because these places are so special. You couldn't build them, you couldn't create them. They're something that contributes so much to our world.
Yeah.
And our work is just an extension of that, trying to keep protecting them.
Yeah. I mean, you're speaking to my heart right there. So I appreciate it. Thank you again, Erin. It's been a joy and a privilege to talk with you. Thank you for the work you're doing in this space. And yeah, just thanks for a good and fun conversation.
Yeah, thanks to you for getting more people outside. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. Heck yeah. Hey everyone, thanks for listening today. If you like this podcast, please share the word. Who Runs This Park's success relies on you rating, reviewing, and sharing the word about the podcast with your friends. If you have an idea for someone you want me to interview for this new segment, send me an email at maddie@whoruntsthispark.com or DM me on Instagram at whoruntsthispark, and we'll make it happen. Thanks again. So thankful for listeners like you. See you next week.